if you're constantly immersed in a stressful environment or an environment that eats away at your esteem, an environment that eats away at your physical health, naturally it is going to have a ripple effect on you. So that where I want to start is, let us even break down what can constitute a toxic workplace environment.
Welcome to the podcast series hosted by Help in Crisis 246, where we focus on teaching what you can do in moments of mental or emotional crisis and where you can find help. But the series is not limited to only teaching how to cope in moments of crisis, but we focus on teaching you everyday methods that anyone can use during moments of high stress, difficulties, hurt, panic, anxiety. In other words, how to deal with some of life's most inevitably difficult moments. We do this through interviewing varying experts from different fields who share with us nuggets of wisdom on how we can cope in healthier ways through some of the most common difficulties we all face in life. We also interview those who are somewhere along on their own healing journeys and their journeys towards finding their authentic self as they share from a very vulnerable and open position how they were able to navigate that journey. I'm Michelle Russell. I'm an attorney and a mental health advocate, and I'm very passionate about this area because I had my own healing journey that I've been on for quite some time. And I really just hope that the series can help you navigate your difficult moments and your journey towards a better version of yourself. So if this interests you, be sure to subscribe to our channel, and you can follow us on IG or Facebook at Help in Crisis 246.
Today's episode, we are discussing a topic that is very dear to my heart, and that's because of my crossover specialty between being an employment lawyer as well as being a mental health advocate. Those of you who know me know I tend to do quite a bit of videos on employment law matters, on workplace matters, and I write articles on the same thing. And one of the things I talk about a lot are toxic workplace practices and toxic workplace cultures. And as we go through the podcast, I'm going to make a distinction between the two, because it could be a toxic practice that is not a culture of the organization, because sometimes out of our own upbringing, out of our own societal norms, we create toxic work cultures or work practices for ourselves that don't originate from the workplace. But other times, and more often than not, it's the culture within the workplace. So that we're going to look at how to navigate a toxic workplace or a toxic workplace practice without losing your mind, without giving up your health, and without losing yourself. And to assist me in that discussion today, I have with me Dr. Kerrian Peart, who is a psychologist and whose practice focuses a lot on helping employees navigate these kinds of environments, helping employees navigate job loss, whether through termination, resignation, redundancy, etc. So she also understands it very well, and particularly from the mental health aspect. Dr. Peart, thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. It is exciting to meet someone on a different side of the coin that does this work and understands the frustrations of things. So it's a delight to be here. Absolute delight to be here. So yes.
Can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you even get into this focus area?
Sure. So I came into it from two avenues. I would say one, the personal experiences of having to navigate toxicity, workplace toxicity, in the US context, because I lived and worked in the US for over 20 years. And so recognizing certain things in that context that made me feel very compromised in my identity, in my well-being, and overall, just in my sanity. There were many things that people were saying and doing that were like, that this doesn't make sense. And so I worked while also doing my graduate studies. And I found a program in psychology that really focuses on the cultural context of things. So how organizations and systems, which is a focus area of psychology that I've studied, within specific cultural contexts, design their workspace or place, or design the systems that they use within those spaces for, efficiency and at certain levels of output. But what those things really mean for staff or employees that are working in that type of environment. Because very often, as you know, Michelle, these organizations and the systems are built to serve themselves in a way. And we just come in to help to facilitate the movement of the mission, the vision, and the goals, right? So
I always say that the rule maker will make a rule that benefits itself for the obvious reason.
Exactly. So both studying the putting together and the designs of these places, as well as experiencing those really weird and uncomfortable scenarios, as you mentioned, the workplace culture, as well as what I'm bringing in, because I might be bringing in toxicities as well. So studying that dynamic while living it was why I do what I do now.
I'm gonna push you a little.
Sure.
We had a conversation prior to the interview, and you told me something you had observed in your family and how toxic workplace cultures affected even your own parents. Are you willing to share that story?
Absolutely, absolutely. So being completely transparent with this is looking from this very personal side of things. So moving to the US as a teenager, but parents were
where you're from. Not everybody will pick up that he's Jamaican.
Well, yeah, they will pick up by now, right? That I'm Jamaican. So moving from Jamaica to the US was in and of itself quite an experience that I had to approach as being in boot camp. That's how I oriented myself to what was to come in the American experience. Because people have a very interesting perception of when you go abroad, right? When you go foreign, that certain things are supposed to be a certain way. And my parents did a very good job in being honest that it was not going to be that way. However, what occurred was a lot more intense than I think that they could ever have been prepared for.
And what were they doing in Jamaica before they chose to migrate?
In Jamaica, they own their own things. They own their own companies and businesses. And they did what they did and did it very well. Moving to the US, it's hard to then place yourself coming from such an autonomous position in your home country to now having to navigate how to work for somebody, and then work for somebody who's telling you simultaneously you're too much and not enough. So it was very interesting and very hard on my parents. My father is now disabled, and my mother has passed.
We often forget it. We know it on a subconscious and an unconscious level that we spend the majority of our time either at work or at school. That's the reality. 8 hours out of our day is there, and about 2 hours is prepping for it one way or the other. Prepping to go or getting back home from. So at the very least 10 hours out of your day. Now, if you're the type that works late and overtime, it takes up even a bit of your alert hours. So that if you're constantly immersed in a stressful environment, or an environment that eats away at your esteem, an environment that eats away at your physical health, naturally it is going to have a ripple effect on you. So that where I want to start is, let us even break down what can constitute a toxic workplace. And let's break that down a little. What would you say are toxic workplace practices and then toxic workplace cultures?
Sure. So practices, i.e. behaviors in the psychology language, right, show up as, I'll do employee leader or employee supervisor type of behaviors. So if you have a supervisor or a leader that does the micromanaging, they're constantly double checking, triple checking your work for some reason. They're constantly, they give you an assignment, and every day them coming to ask you how the movement of the assignment is going, right? It's that stripping away of autonomy. It's the stripping away of your intellect and actual capability to function in the way that they've hired you to function, right?
Very
It
good.
is such a conundrum. Another behavior or practice that I have also experienced and witnessed is this gaslighting, what we call it gaslighting, right? Where they tell you, oh, you know, Michelle, you handled that project so well. It came out so wonderfully, and you know, you did all this stuff. But I'm not sure if you really followed through in the way that we would have liked you to follow through. And, you know, I'm not sure if you really stood by the protocols of the company. And so this doubting, this bigging you up while simultaneously tearing you down, right? And I'm sure you've had conversations, Michelle, around imposter syndrome, where you feel like you know you're competent, but the doubting messages come in to question your competency and skills. The
Yes.
gaslighting lends to that, right? That type of tag team process there. You would also find the passive aggressive communications.
Oh Lord, that is rife.
Classic,
Right.
telltale, right? And those are the communication where you read it and you say to yourself, hold on, is this a demand? Covered, like it's sugar coated in a way. You're like, no, but this is a demand. This is a direct kind of insult. When you get that type of thought, then that is the passive aggressive communication, right? So if people are wondering, well, what do you mean by that? When you read something or you hear something and you say to yourself, wait, hold on, them talking to me sideways. Yeah, you're not talking to me too good right now. That's that type of communication there.
And under that, I want to throw in the victimization, which
Oh gosh,
is ruling through fear. So
yes.
that if people speak up or speak out or speak against, there's some form of victimization. So they're denied workplace advancement, denied workplace training, opportunities. They're left out of certain meetings that, based on their qualification or their position, they should be in. And what it is the subtle, very passive aggressive message of fall in line or else.
I'm glad you raised it like that, because what I was going to say is this phrase, and I tell people all the time, be wary of this phrase. This one phrase will give away any workplace. Oh, but we're a family here.
Ah, why would you say that?
Listen to me, Linda. Remember that little boy, Linda, listen. Listen, man, that phrase, we are a family here, or we are a family, dangerous. And it is
Why would you
indicative.
say that?
I would say that because it is indicative of certain environments lining you up for a level of exploitation and ill will, you know, ill health. Because many companies, in my experience, and again, in the experience of those I have worked with and supported through transitions, have found that, oh, but the company said, you know, that we're a family and that we can get along well and we can communicate transparently. But then they use your own words against you, or they infiltrate the times in which you are now no longer at work, right? They've stepped boundaries. Even though you haven't had to say this is a boundary, they've already overstepped it, right? Because we're a family here. Of course I can reach you at 8:30 in the night. Of course you're supposed to respond to my, you know, 11:59 p.m. email about something that's due 3 weeks from now, right? That phrase sets us up, because a lot of people feel that when a company or whatever space you're working in says, oh, we're a family, what it does psychologically is it triggers you to let your guard down.
But
And
can
then,
I look at it from the other angle?
which is,
I believe it's a way to set you up for emotional manipulation.
then there's that.
We are a family, so you are obligated to me.
Obligated.
Why would you be upset that I want you to travel when you know we got this thing last minute? I know you have a child and a baby, but didn't we pay for the surgery for that same baby the other day? Is this how you treat family? we gave and now it's your turn to give. Is this one-sided? So the emotional manipulation, because we see it in internal family systems, and it's just superimposed into the workplace when we are a small company and a family that cares for each other. To be fair, some are nice. Some really do act like family and are not toxic. Let's say that.
Yes, some do, but they're so far and few, right? Between. So we have to be very careful with what we're reading in a job description and what we're being told in an interview. And we have to critically assess. What do you mean by a family? Do you mean calling me at 8 p.m. in the middle of, in the night? Do you mean that 3 a.m. I'm supposed to be up answering all emails? Like, what do you mean by that? You can't just have these statements said to you anymore. You have to ask and assess what the meaning is behind some of these comments.
Yes, for sure. And but I would chip in as the attorney now, not mental health advocate. But the other practices are the overworking, the expectation that work trumps all. So that the expectation that you should understand we have a bottom line. You should understand we have a deadline. You should understand your position or what I'm paying you means I require a pound of flesh. So that if you are leaving after working a 10-hour day, you still get the passive-aggressive comments that suggest you're not dedicated enough, even though your contract contracted you to 8 hours and you've already given an extra 2. It is the requesting vacation and constantly being told, can you put it off? And then also being told that you're going to lose any untaken vacation at the end of the year when they were the reason you didn't get to take it in the first place.
Yes.
It is wanting you to constantly be in meetings, but also expecting you to produce. But you can't be doing work if you're actually in the meeting, and then calling you upon disciplinary hearings and meetings because you failed to meet your annual or quarterly targets without considering the part they played in that. Another toxic practice is constantly adding to your job description. So you have the written one. And generally, most of these contracts and job descriptions will have that, what we call the all-encompassing clause that says, or any other duties that may be required for your role or be required for the business interests. Now, there's a lot of law surrounding that about what applies and what doesn't apply. I'm not going to go into it for this podcast, but the reality is the exploitation comes by constantly throwing extra on you without training, without extra personnel assistance or equipment assistance. Your pay hasn't gone up, your benefits haven't gone up, you haven't gotten extra mental health or vacation days, but you're expected to produce at the same level you did when you didn't have all of that work. And then they praise Tamika, who was able to do it, and you are not able to do it. So what's wrong with your time management or your organizational skills? And they're not assessing stuff like, well, Tamika might not be married or might only have one child, you have 4 or whatever. And then they guilt you for being sick when half the time your health is going down because your stress levels are up and your cortisol increases. Once cortisol increases, it affects your immune system. It affects the digestive system. Everything out of whack. And you're like, I know you've taken 5, 6 sick days for the year. And I often say to myself, 5 days a year is nothing. Are we expected to never get sick? Like, the common cold is issue enough when you have people working in AC. One person comes in and then the whole office is sick. And then they expect you to work while you're sick, and they expect you to that's while you're sick. And also on vacation, so we could go on. And the guilt for picking up the children, the guilt for being pregnant, because they can't.
That's another thing.
Don't be pregnant because that breaches the law. So they might say, oh, another one? You ready for that? Or you think you could handle that? Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. Those multiple behaviors are very indicative of the toxicities. And then you had asked about culture. Toxic workplace culture is when the organization is built on fundamental systems or practices that make that behavior inherent, make the behaviors that you're talking about inherent. So when an organization, and when we're talking about, let me back up, we're talking about the organizational culture, which is what I studied for a long time, it is very much indicative of, and by and large, the extension of those who have built the organization, right? So if you have people, the leaders or the founders of your organization that are used to overextending themselves, that are used to speaking to people in a particular way, right? Or constantly being stressed out because they don't use the right resources or equip themselves properly to carry out a particular function, then that mindset, those behaviors formulate the culture of the organization, right? Because if they can do it, the people that I employ should also be able to do it.
Yes.
Why you can't do your job at 100% when I'm only giving you 20% of resources? Why you can't make up that 80? Aren't you smart enough? Right? Why can't you stay past 6 o'clock to get this project done? Mind you, the project is due 3 weeks from now, but they want it done in the same day they assign it to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Ridiculous deadlines.
Ridiculous deadlines. And then it's either the ridiculous deadlines as well as, oh, the competing priorities. Please, please stop it. Right? So the culture of an organization being toxic is very much an extension of those who are at the top of organizations and the ways that their behaviors have become so normal to them that they expect everybody else that they've pulled into their stratosphere to behave and function like them. And so when we speak about that toxic work culture or workplace culture that's toxic, what you're really looking at are the norms that are inherent to that organization's leadership.
So let's be practical here.
Mm-hmm.
We all need to work.
Yes.
We all need to earn money and we need to pay bills. And the reality is, and it's something you touched on based on your studies, is that culture affects workplace culture. Mm-hmm. The real question I'm getting to is, because it's so pervasive and it's going to be hard to find a workplace that doesn't have some kind of toxic practice. And then even you, if you've been doing it for a long time, you carry it with you. And you might be perpetuating the very cycle you hate.
Correct.
How do you survive it? Do we just quitting? Do we jump from job to job? What is your advice? And how do we?
So I'm glad you asked that, because that's what I help people to recognize, right? When working with folks who are in transition from one job space to the next, I do that questioning with them, like, but how did you contribute to some of your experiences in the workspace? Because it can't just be the workspace alone. It cannot, right? There are often things that you as an individual are going through that will cause or, offset somebody else to respond to you in a certain way, right? For instance, I will use myself as a perfect example of this. Grief. Grief is a very interesting process. So I mentioned that I lost my mom, right?
Yeah.
We lost her in 2017. And in the US, you only get I don't know, I think it was probably a week of bereavement leave I got. And I think my supervisor at the time tried to stretch it as much as possible because she understood the issue.
It's here. You generally see 3 days to 5 days if you're lucky. Most say 3 days.
Right. So 3 to 5 days. So that happened. 2018, I was in full breakdown mode.
Yeah.
In full breakdown mode. I was losing my hair. I went down to my high school weight. I mean, full, complete emotional breakdown due to this grieving process, loss of my mother, now having to take care of my father full time. And I was living in DC at the time, and my father was in Florida, and it was this constant flying back in full breakdown mode and still just on some autopilot functioning to do all the things I needed to do. What was showing up at work was a very broken and unhealthy version of myself that caused me to become extremely defensive because I wanted to just sit down. I just wanted to just not deal with certain things and just process the loss of my mother, right? And I still had to show up at work because, like you say, you still have bills to pay, right? It's not like you can go stay at your auntie house now and breeze out. It don't work so when you're in these foreign countries. It's not so it go. So still had to show up, still had to be paying rent, still had to be doing all these things and managing the debt. I mean, everything that comes with being in these foreign countries. And I would snap at people. I would just have no tolerance for anything and everything. Like, don't give me no more work to do. I don't want to be in your full meetings. That is not relevant to me. Let me just do what I have to do here and leave, right? Don't come at my team sideways. Like things were just setting me off. And after a few months of that happening, I recognized that, yes, my workspace was toxic to begin with because the leadership in there was just ridiculous. But now I am bringing in toxicity. So the clash of the two created such havoc in the space. I said to myself, well, you know what the easiest thing is, as we say in Jamaica, take care of yourself. And I quit. And I took some time to just kind of recalibrate before moving to the next job. And in that recalibration process, this is what I asked people to think about. What was it that you were taking in to work differently in the past 3 months or past 6 months that now you're complaining of X, Y, and Z? Think about that because you are responsible for a certain level of the experience you're having. You just don't have an experience, right? So reflecting on, are you in a grieving process? Was there people going through frustrations with their children being ill, frustrations with their marriage falling apart, frustrations with the wedding planning, all sorts of stuff that we're going through, and we take those things to work. And oftentimes, those things can rub other people wrong and add to the frustrations you're already experiencing there. So you can't just say, okay, it's them, right? And I need to be psychologically safe, so they need to fix themselves. No, you need to kind of work on your own safety first and take accountability of what it is you are processing through and how you're showing up and how to not take those things into the next space. You can't just keep running from space to space. You have to do inventory of how you're showing up, why you're showing up that way, and what are the resources that you need to do better for yourself and those around you as you transition.
But then we can move to the next one. I remember I wrote an article sometime last year. It was a very personal one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was entitled Listen to Your Body.
Oh.
And something I see often where employees are just getting sick. Sometimes it's environmental issues, the AC vent or mold.
Oh, yes. Right.
And we've had a lot of that in Barbados over the last few months. Lots of the public sector buildings, etc., the schools, getting sick, but sometimes also from the stress of the job, the responsibilities, the requirements, or the personalities you're working with. And I've watched people break down, and I don't just mean emotionally break down. Their bodies get ill, kind of like what you mentioned with your parents, and they still push themselves. They don't actually stop and say, is this healthy? Can I do this? And so when I wrote about listening to your body, it's one of the first clues that something is going on with you mentally, because sometimes when we feel stuck, we internalize it and we say to ourselves, there's no point focusing on the bad because I can't change it right now. I can't quit right now. I have to stay right now. No point focusing on it. And we fool ourselves into believing that it's not affecting us anymore. But then we start to have headaches. We have neck tension. We have changes in our sleep pattern. We can't sleep, or we sleep too much, or we can't sleep through the night. We have digestive issues. We're putting on excessive weight. We're losing our appetite. So the body is the clue that no matter what you're telling yourself about how fine you are, you probably are not fine. And so I was writing that in the article, and this lady reached out to me and she said, for whatever reason, the article gave her the power to quit. No, I wasn't trying to tell nobody to quit. I was just whatever. And one of the things she said to me is she noticed she had a very supportive home environment. You know, she had developed anxiety over the years. She was on anxiety meds and she was on depression meds. Then she had problems with, you know, physically, all of it was spiraling, and her husband was very supportive. She would turn up and she would just do whatever she was told. She wouldn't argue back, and she was losing herself in the process because she felt trapped. I'm saying this to say she didn't bring anything in. It wasn't necessarily one of those situations where she was bringing something in, but she also wasn't able to set boundaries. She also wasn't able to speak up for herself. Fear of losing the job, for fear of displeasing, you know, all those things. I want to address it from that angle as well. How do you survive the environment when you feel stuck and you have to stay for now?
Yeah. So in cases where it's not you bringing anything in, then it is a matter of pivoting to a different strategy, right? It's the strategy, the exit strategy, really, of figuring out within 3 months.
Ultimately, you have to leave. It's just
ultimately, ultimately, that is my take. Again, personal experience, both mine, what I witnessed with my parents. Mom should have left her job sooner, but she couldn't, right? What I see with other colleagues of mine that have traversed some very, very difficult things, they should have left sooner. But it's generally the majority of folks I've worked with, it's a matter of, yes, you need to leave. Why? Because the culture, the organizational culture that bolsters these practices that we see is so pervasive. There is no changing it. So no matter how this company may be a revolving door, like we're saying, you know, retention is low, people just keep leaving. Some companies say, well, that has nothing to do with us. They were weak. They should leave.
Right.
That is how a lot of companies position themselves. Like, yeah, they should leave. It's never, or hardly ever a process of, hold on, why are we losing 6 people per month? Like, why are we losing these people? These people are qualified. These people are good at their game. Why are we losing them? For companies that recognize those things and then start to make a shift and pull in certain resources, leadership goes through training of their own, then I would say, give it some time and see how it will impact you, but you still need to have a strategy, right? For companies that are not shifting at all, definite strategy, and a definite strategy where you pull on a number of resources. So for those who don't necessarily have supports at home, right? They don't have a supported partner or whatever the case is. What other social networks can we lean in on? Are you part of associations? Are you a part of something, you know, otherwise? And I use social networks as strong supports because within those networks, there's a level of resourcing and perspective that your immediate family doesn't always see, right? Sometimes the social frames can give you something else that your family won't say to you sometimes, right? Sometimes your family wants to really protect you and they won't say certain things to you or suggest certain things to you to really get you to shift the mindset. Whereas your social networks, they may not know you in the same way as your family does. And so they'll just immediately say, well, maybe you need to address this or get this other skill or shift to this particular angle or connect with so-and-so this way, right? So I think those things are important to have for that jolt of perspective that many of us need, but don't necessarily get from our families. The second thing I do elevate for people to think through strategically in this kind of strategic process is whether or not you are actually in true alignment with what you're doing. Or are you doing it because it was the quickest job to get? Are you doing it because you're good at it, but it doesn't necessarily excite you or fulfill you, right? Because those things too are important. When you're aligned with your job, you'll become resentful to a point, and that can cause some of the frustrations that you possibly are experiencing as well. So the social networks, really elevate that side of things and really elevate this misalignment that many people are actually experiencing. It's like, but I've been doing this for 15 years, Dr. Kerry. Why should I pivot out of this? No. Have you enjoyed this for 15 years? Like, has this given you meaningful fulfillment for the past 15 years? Not really. I'm good at it though. Being good at something and being truly fulfilled by something are two different realities, right? So processing through those, I think, are very critical for people when you're considering how to navigate your space. Like, this space is not changing. I have been in here too long, and I'm potentially building up a level of resentment because I'm not getting promoted, right? Because the culture is such that it will just tap you out at a certain level. You're not going to get nowhere else.
Right.
And you just sit in there. You just sit in there. And I mentioned to you how I've had the experience with colleagues who sit there and they're like, well, I can't bother to quit now because I want the pension. Right?
That's a big influencing factor. I've heard that so many times.
I want the
so
pension.
many times.
Or I want the investment benefits. Because if I'm there beyond 3 years, I get vested now and I get a certain money back, and that kind of, those things are important to consider. I agree. But Michelle, at the end of the day, a one life you have to live. And if you're so unhappy going to this place, is it worth the pension? You sitting down there waiting on this pension?
And what will your life be when you reach pensionable age? Because if you get too sick, you kind of enjoy
right,
or you might pass before you get the pensionable benefit. Don't think that way. So what are some of the grounding exercises you could recommend in the moment? Because the reality is the exit strategy is a long-term plan. Right. And you need short-term coping skills. You were hauled over the coals in a meeting and you might not have deserved it, or you deserved some of it, but it was a bit unfair. It was done to punish you or embarrass you. How do you hold your tongue? How do you know when to speak and not to speak without losing too much of yourself? I mean, I would speak about it from the other angle, but I'm asking you to address it from the emotional health and the mental health aspect.
Certainly. So things that I have personally done and then clients have used and it kind of works for them. It may be really silly when I say it at first, but depending on the setting, like if you're in a meeting, like you're saying, that has nothing really to do with you and you really can't speak out or excuse yourself, because some spaces you can get up and like, excuse me, and you walk away, you'll be fine. Not every environment, right? So while you're just there in those spaces, make your grocery list. Make your to-do list, right? Create a list of boundaries that you want to now exercise. Like take those periods of time to reflect on where you are, what it is that you are feeling in the moment, and start writing out the new game plan. That's what I had to do in my spaces. I've had colleagues and clients actually in those moments write out practice resignation letters. How they would actually now want to execute their resignation, because they're seeing that their value is not being taken seriously. They're seeing that they're not being heard, right? They're seeing that they're not getting any resources or promoted like Tamika and everybody else. So you recognize that, you know what? This is not going to go much further. Let me practice this strategy, this arm of the strategy. I've also encouraged people in those moments when you want to speak up, but you know, you need to kind of just hold it. To speak up, yes, but with the understanding of where you're speaking from. Are you speaking from a space of frustration and anger? Like, is the reason why you want to speak up in this moment because you're irritated and angry? Or is it a matter of you truly want to benefit the situation? Think about those dynamics and play it in your mind. So practice in the moments. I've had to practice doing something else with my body or my face, right? Like nod, see if you can nod and, you know, just affirm to yourself that this is bullshit right now, but I'm just no one. Go ahead, Charlie. Yes, absolutely. Right? Literally practice something else. Use the moments. And it takes a while. It takes a little bit to get those things, but those are two things immediately that come to my mind in terms of how to cope. Practice things in your head, shift your body language to be a little bit more just relax, just, you know, take in the moment, yes, process it, but outwardly just work on, or get to write in your resignation letter, get to write in your grocery list, something. Keep yourself present, but not reactive. That's kind of the approach that I encourage.
The other thing is creating space. Create space between the moment of the event and your reaction to it as much as you can. So that when I get an email that infuriates me in some way, in that moment, I allow myself to type a response, you know, because I am emotionally processing. So it is, dear Dan, according to your email, I would like to remind you that on X date, blah, blah, at X time, and I refer you to paragraph.
Yeah.
I write it. But when I'm done, I put it in draft.
Yeah.
I do not send.
Those said it.
It's cathartic because I got out what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And I have a 24-hour rule. It must not be sent for 24 hours. I don't care if they needed a response this evening. Because I cannot trust my objectivity in this moment, at best, I'll send a holding email. Thank you for your email dated, and I note your request for a response by this evening. However, I will be unable to do so, but shall send a response no later than 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'm not asking for permission. Even if you're a senior, I'm not asking for permission. I'm actually delaying it for both me and you. Like, this is benefiting both of us.
Yes.
Now, the third, and in my mind, the most important thing to do in a toxic workplace, and this is the lawyer in me as well as the mental health in me, because we're going to come back to the gaslighting.
Oh.
As much as possible, put everything in writing. Always an email. Always an email or a WhatsApp. Always, because people like to twist what was said or deny it was said. And that's where the gaslighting comes in. You're like, well, you told me I could come in at 10 a.m. And you're like, I told you that. I didn't tell you that. No, you know they told you. But they're so strong in it that you started up yourself and you said, well, maybe I misunderstood. When they tell you you can come in for 10 a.m., you go in front of the desk and you say, thank you so much for listening to my concerns and for allowing me to come in for 10 a.m. tomorrow. I will see you then. Or you put it in a WhatsApp, because guess what? If they don't write back and say, what do you mean come in at 10? I never said that. That in itself is proof that number one, they knew. And number two, at the very least, they were complicit or what we call implied consent in law, right? So my three favorite, self-awareness, the second one being, well, the third most important being write everything down. And the second one being give yourself some space. Now, we could talk about this all day, but I'm realizing the time. So we'll probably have to come and do a part 2. But honestly, I really, really like what Dr. Peart said. At some point, you're going to have to realize that the only answer is you have to leave. And it might really come from a misalignment. And sometimes it's misalignment as to career. Sometimes it's misalignment as to the type of your career. Because you could be a lawyer and do different types of law. Like she's a psychologist and she does different types of psychology. So the misalignment mightn't be in the career choice, but in the subset of it. And the misalignment can just be with the company and the people. So yes, there might be other corporate environments which have toxic practices, but some have less of it. So maybe you can sooner handle toxic working hours, but not toxic passive aggression or toxic people and personalities and dispositions. You will have to figure that out. So yes, it might take you a while to find somewhere you can be long enough, but I believe there's nothing more important than your mental and physical health, because they're the hardest thing to recover.
Yes.
Money comes and goes. No matter how much money you have, you can't protect yourself from ill health. You might be able to pay for the surgeries, but it doesn't guarantee you life. So if you can exercise in life choices that give you a better chance of surviving physically and having better physical health and mental health, because one affects the other, you can't escape it. I always say, read the book, the body keeps score. One affects the other, one affects the other. Choose the path that gives you the greater access to improved mental, emotional, and physical health. And sometimes that means leaving the toxic relationship by divorce. It could be friends, it could be parent, child, and it is often a workplace. Dr. Peart, what are your closing remarks?
Yeah, I ditto everything you say. I completely agree with you. And honestly, you cannot you can't get back time, right? So the time that we do have, you
Yes.
need to figure out how best to spend it at the highest quality possible.
Dr. Peart, thank you so much. We're going to have to rejoin because we're going to have to talk about leaving that whole exit strategy
Yes.
more detail, and then mourning the loss of a job. You know, I'm
I
very
have a whole little strategy for that. Yes.
so to have you back. Where do people find you if they want to have a chat with you, if they want to consult?
Yeah, so you can find me at hello@peartconsulting.org, and Peart is PEART consulting.org. So hello@peartconsulting.org, or on Instagram for folks who love to be scrolling on Instagram. I'm also there at Dr.Kerry_P, P as in Paul, and the Kerry is with an I, not a Y.
Don't worry, I'll put it up on the screen so it's easier for them to find you. On LinkedIn?
Oh, yes, definitely on LinkedIn. Kerrian Peart on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, I really want to thank you for being with us today and sharing your knowledge. And I assure you we're going to be back at this. For those of you watching, thanks again for watching. Feel free to reach out with any questions or comment down below, and we can continue this conversation. How are you surviving a toxic workplace? How do you suggest others survive it? And when do you know it's time to go? Thanks for watching.